This presentation will look at Lake City's housing demographics and how they compare with other Seattle neighborhoods. The area in orange represents all of Lake City. The area in blue represents Lake City's Hub Urban Village, or HUV. This area is basically Lake City's civic and retail core. A comprehensive plan was created in the 90s to ensure the Hub Urban Village developed in a thoughtful and balanced way, with a mix of housing, businesses, and recreational space that would accommodate increasing density. In several recent documents, city officials have indicated Lake City needs to further support Seattle's citywide goals of ending homelessness and providing more low-income housing, implying that Lake City has not been doing its part to support these goals. So is Lake City doing its part? Let's take a look. To understand low-income housing, it helps to understand some of the terminology. Market rate housing is just that. Housing that rents or sells at the established market rate or higher. Subsidized housing is complicated and comes in many different forms. Basically, anyone earning 80% or less of the area's median income. In Seattle, the median income is roughly $60,000 a year, with some variance depending on the size of the household. Extremely low-income housing, or ELI, is specifically for persons earning 30% of median income or lower. McDermott Place, a housing development for homeless veterans, is an example of ELI housing here in Lake City. Low-income housing is a very broad term. It can refer to projects owned and operated directly by the city, or it can refer to projects operated by nonprofit organizations that receive city funding. Some of the nonprofits who operate low-income housing here in Lake City include Lehigh, the Low-Income Housing Institute, which operates McDermott Place, SHAG, Senior Housing Assistance Group, which operates Cedar Park on 30th Avenue, and CPC, which is Community Psychiatric Clinic. They're about to build a new housing development for mentally ill veterans who are also dealing with addiction issues. Seattle Housing Authority also oversees the issuing of federal Section 8 vouchers. These vouchers enable low-income persons to rent market-rate property at a reduced or subsidized rate. There are many other publicly subsidized housing units here in Lake City as well: group homes, halfway houses, and Oxford houses, just to name a few. Current best practices in urban design indicate that concentrating poverty in an area at a rate higher than regional averages equates to a drop in the quality of life for everyone, no matter their income level, because it basically promotes a cycle of poverty. The idea is to develop instead an area with a mix of incomes, some below median income level, some above. Other areas of the country typically use a county average for this. Here in King County, that average works out to about 12% of the housing stock being low income. Seattle's Office of Housing, however, has set their low income balance point at 20%. This map of Lake City looks only at extremely low income, or ELI, housing in Lake City, compared with other Seattle neighborhoods. You'll see the areas here in darkest blue represent the highest concentrations of ELI housing. Of the 54 neighborhoods identified, Lake City ranks 7th in concentration, behind neighborhoods like Pioneer Square, First Hill, and New Holly. Please note that the information on these maps is based on 2010 census data provided by Seattle's Office of Housing, so the data is already almost 3 years old and does not take into account newer developments in Lake City completed within the last few years. These maps also do not take into consideration the many other forms of low-income housing we just discussed. So as you're looking at these numbers, understand the total low-income numbers for Lake City are actually much higher than what's represented here. We then broke the data down by census tract. Again, this is only looking at extremely low-income housing, which is just for folks earning 30% of median income or less. The blue bubbles indicate visually comparative concentration. The red star indicates the location of the old Fire Station 39 site. The Office of Housing staff recently pointed out that the Fire Station 39 census tract could be developed with up to 96 more units of low-income housing before the 20% cap for that tract was met. While that's technically true, it is certainly misleading. Looking only at one census tract does not give a complete picture of housing concentrations in all of Lake City. This approach fails to address new housing developments in a holistic way that would ensure neighborhoods receive a balance of development. This map breaks it down further into census block group. This is particularly of note because it shows the relative concentration of extremely low-income housing in certain areas. You can see that the Littlebrook neighborhood here near 145th is at a 17% concentration, while the Meadowbrook area here is at a 41% concentration, much higher than the 20% standard for Seattle. Notice that some data is missing from the hub urban village, so let's take a closer look at that. If we pinpoint a center on Lake City Way here and look at a 1-block radius surrounding that, which is what the circle here indicates, we see that the last market rate housing developments were completed over 10 years ago. Approximately 270 units represented by the blue dots here and here. By comparison, looking at that same 1-block area, in just the last 4 years, we've seen approximately 480 new units of low-income housing added, represented by the green dots here, 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 and here. This dot represents a new development that would begin breaking ground soon, and this dot represents the proposed low-income housing at the old Fire Station 39 site. One of the other pieces to consider when we're looking at housing is access to amenities. We'll talk more about that in our next segment on recreation and education, but you can see on this map that Lake City lacks the kind of safe pedestrian access that many other Seattle neighborhoods enjoy. This is particularly an issue for low-income residents who often do not own vehicles or cannot afford other means of transportation. While not specifically housing projects, let's talk for a minute about some of the additional projects the Mennonite Church and Lake City Task Force on Homelessness are currently pursuing. For 2 years, students from Seattle University's nursing program have been conducting research in Lake City with the end goal of building a medical respite facility here in Lake City. Their work is funded by the Senegal Foundation. You may recognize Senegal's name from his position as former CEO of Costco. The only other sizable medical respite facility in Seattle is located across the street from Harborview Medical Center. The Mennonite Church currently runs a small drop-in homeless facility on 33rd Avenue. When that new homeless housing project next door breaks ground, the bottom floor of that building will house a new and expanded version of this drop-in homeless facility. It's known as God's Little Acre. The new facility will be approximately twice the size of the current one. These advocates are also working to bring Urban Rest Stop to Lake City. You may be familiar with Urban Rest Stop downtown, which is another drop-in facility for homeless. The Lake City Neighborhood Alliance has been advocating for a balanced, holistic approach to neighborhood planning. This approach has been repeatedly advocated by the mayor himself, as well as city council members, particularly in regard to recent developments such as Yesler Terrace, High Point, and New Holly. The fire station was originally built with local community funds and has always served as a civic space. Because Lake City's hub urban village is already well populated with low-income housing, building additional housing at this location just doesn't make sense. Therefore, the LCNA recommends that the property either be sold for market rate development or reserved as civic space, which the Lake City community can then develop through future fundraising and grants. We hope you'll attend the 2 upcoming community meetings to discuss the city's proposal for the use of that site. If you'd like to learn more, please watch our other presentations, which include Education and Recreation, Work, Business and Community Concerns, and Lake City, Getting to Know Your Neighborhood.